It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story, hopes for a turning point in the war in Ukraine. President Trump says the United States will provide security guarantees to Ukraine as part of a peace deal as he welcomes President Zelenskyy and European leaders to the White House.
President Zelenskyy, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
You see, I changed, you are not.
Maybe.
Joining Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy, leaders including Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, saying the meeting could be a historic step towards peace in Ukraine. Well, the leaders are still together in the Oval Office, with reports suggesting President Trump interrupted that meeting to call Vladimir Putin. We'll be live at the White House. And that gathering, sure to dominate tomorrow's front pages. We'll take a first look in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. Their first meeting in the Oval Office in February shocked the world. A wartime leader chastised by the president whose help he so desperately needed. Today, the mood was very different. Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy sharing warm words, even jokes, as the US president welcomed European leaders to the White House. It's not the meeting Donald Trump wants. That's a summit with Mr. Zelenskyy and Vladimir Putin. But tonight, what could be a turning point on the road to peace, as Mr. Trump said the US would provide security guarantees to Ukraine as part of any peace deal. Well, a warm welcome then for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Earlier, President Trump greeting his car, sharing a few words with him. The world's media, of course, watching on before heading inside to the talks underway. A familiar scene awaited Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the Oval Office, the mood drastically different to his last visit back in February.
Thank you so much, Mr. President.
The decision to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees, but stop short of pushing for their full membership.
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. And the people that are waiting for us, I think they're very like-minded. They want to help out also.
President Zelenskyy, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said to one that attacked you last time. See, now I remember that.
I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelenskyy.
In the same suit. You see, I changed, you are not.
This week you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept, you know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
We have possibility now to buy weapons from the United States. We are thankful for this program and this opportunity. We are thankful for Europe. They pay for this. And through NATO program for Territorial and etc. We have some programs where we can have some money to finance this. And this is a part, I think, it's not a part for the war and to defend us. It also will be a part for security guarantees, to strengthen our army, to rearm Ukrainian army. This is very, very important.
We're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
We are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war. And we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good.
Well, joining Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy at the White House, the leaders of the UK, France, Germany, Italy and Finland, as well as the NATO Secretary-General and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And again, the cameras allowed in to hear their comments at the start of their roundtable meeting.
We're going to try and get a three-party meeting, maybe as soon as we can. And I have a feeling you and President Putin are going to work something out. Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelenskyy and by the people of Ukraine working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it. So I hope we have a good meeting. And if we can have a good meeting, I'll set up a meeting with President Putin. And if you'd like, I'll go to that meeting. And not that I want to do that, but I will do that because we want to save a lot of people from dying. A lot of people are dying, and we got to save them. You know, in the 6 or so wars that we stopped, we haven't had a ceasefire. And so I don't know that it's necessary. You can do it through the war, but it would be, I like the ceasefire from another standpoint. You immediately stop the killing. But I believe a peace agreement at the end of all of this is something that's very attainable.
I think if we play this well, we could end this. And we have to end this. We have to stop the killing. We have to stop the destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure. It is a terrible war. So I'm really excited. And let's make the best out of today and make sure that from today onwards, we get this thing to an end as soon as possible.
The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday. But now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire.
The war in Ukraine has had a huge impact, particularly on the Ukrainians who've borne the brunt of it, but it's also had an impact on Europe and on the United Kingdom. There's not a family or community that hasn't been affected. And when we talk about security, we're talking about the security not just of Ukraine, we're talking about the security of Europe and the United Kingdom as well, which is why this is such an important issue.
Well, the leaders then moved through to the Oval Office for talks. That is where they remain. No word on how long those talks might last, but President Trump interrupted that meeting to call Vladimir Putin. Well, let's bring in Mark Stone at the White House tonight. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is at the British Embassy in Washington, and our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Kyiv. So, Mark, first of all, how much of a shift have we seen from Donald Trump today, this confirmation, as it appears, that the US and its military would provide a security guarantee for Ukraine to step in to support them?
Well, Anna, I think first of all it's worth underlining just how unusual today is. Unusual that there should be so many European leaders, key European leaders, in the White House at the same time. But unusual, too, that it was organised at such short notice. We got a kind of underlining of the nature of this day early on today. I think it was before 7 o'clock we saw the flags of all those nations being brought into through the north door of the White House. Here together at over just a weekend's notice. It was only on Saturday that Zelenskyy confirmed that he would be coming to the White House. And then I think in a sort of sense of safety in numbers, his European allies thought that they needed to be here too. And so schedules were ripped up and they all flew here for this pretty extraordinary day. I think there are two major diplomatic achievements that we have seen over the course of today and the past few days. The first is that President Trump, either through cack-handed diplomacy and therefore scaring the hell out of Europe, or through some masterstroke of diplomacy, and it will be the historians and down the line that we establish which of those is true. But either way, he has managed to convene these leaders, to get them here, to get them almost to heel, to his house, to have this extraordinary moment. The other remarkable diplomatic achievement appears to be from Europe in obtaining from America this security commitment, a commitment that as recently as February, during that Oval Office showdown with Zelenskyy, Trump was not willing to give. Remember, that was kind of the catalyst. Yes, the sort of the other catalyst was the fact Zelenskyy wasn't wearing a suit back then. Well, today he was. But the major substantive catalyst to the breakdown in February was the fact that Zelenskyy was saying to Trump, we need security guarantees. Trump back then was saying, I'm not willing to give them. It's up to you in Europe to work out how to look after your own security. Well, now, fast forward 6 months, and in black and white, Trump is saying that he, America, is willing to provide security guarantees in the future to Ukraine to prevent some sort of a repeat of a Russian invasion. Of course, that's all good. That's all positive. But what we don't know is the detail. We don't know what these security guarantees would look like. And crucially, we do not know what Putin would make of those. Now, in the last 15 minutes or so, a remarkable development. My understanding from European sources is that Donald Trump has left the meeting with the European leaders to make a call to President Putin. He said that at the end of the day he would speak to President Putin. We didn't expect that he would interrupt the meeting to have that call with the president. He is due to return to the meeting, perhaps already has done. But this just gives you a sense of the highly unusual nature of this really important day.
Yes, very interesting. Let's bring in Sam Coates then, who's at the British Embassy in Washington for us. And really, it has been an extraordinary show of support from those European leaders for Zelenskyy. You know, will they deem this a success so far? Because clearly it's still ongoing.
Look, I think on its own terms, on the terms of the 8 leaders that showed up, on the terms of Donald Trump, all of them will deem today a success. From Keir Starmer and the European leaders' point of view, I think a couple of things happened today, Anna. First of all, and most importantly, the reason that they all flew to Washington, scrambled, in Keir Starmer's case, off his holiday in order to get here earlier this morning, was to stop some kind of showdown that saw the Americans force President Zelenskyy in order to concede things that he didn't want to in order to secure peace with Russia. Now, that has not happened today, and that was, I think, possibly the primary motive of those leaders flying over, having seen what happened with President Putin and President Trump on Friday. There were worries that might happen, but today that did not. And secondly, as Mark Stone was talking about, you've got the question of security guarantees. Finally, you have President Trump talking on the record, into camera, on TV, saying, I'm going to offer security guarantees. We don't know, as he was saying, what the nature of those will be. But I think overall, Anna, whilst today, just today, might be deemed a success on its own terms, we shouldn't overstate how much closer to peace we are. It was important that today happened in the way that it did. But without that detail, without understanding what we mean by collective defence for Ukraine, if there is Russian aggression after some kind of ceasefire, until we understand where that discussion over territorial integrity and whether or not the borders of Ukraine might change, something that President Zelenskyy has always said should not happen, until we know the details of both of those, then really we are not that much further towards peace. So yes, I think Keir Starmer will go home happy. He had to come today because of the role he has played so far to make sure it didn't go wrong, this negotiation didn't go south. But are there big concrete steps forward? Well, not that we know of from the public statements that we've heard.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. We watch, we wait, we see what else comes out tonight, but you're there live at the British Embassy. Thank you for the moment. Well, of course, while Zelenskyy is in Washington, all the while the war rages in Ukraine. 10 people killed in Russian strikes today, something Volodymyr Zelenskyy says will continue until security guarantees are in place. From Kyiv, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has this report.
Donald Trump says Vladimir Putin wants to stop the killing. Try telling that to the people of Kharkiv, hit by multiple drone strikes at dawn. Dazed residents were led to safety while rescue workers raced to save survivors, prizing them from the rubble. Among the civilians killed, an 18-month-old baby girl, a 16-year-old boy. More than 20 were injured. There was no reason for Putin's military to target this place.
I want to say that this is not a military house. Families live here. Children, youth, old people. There is no military object here. But still, every drone hit it. You can all ask, why is this happening?
There were similar scenes further south in Zaporizhia, more attacks on residential areas. Russians are combining drones with ballistic missiles from multiple directions now and increasing the frequency of their attacks. On his way to Washington, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy wrote, "The Russian war machine continues to destroy lives despite everything. Putin will commit demonstrative killings to maintain pressure on Ukraine and Europe, as well as to humiliate diplomatic efforts. That is precisely why we're seeking assistance to put an end to the killings. That is why reliable security guarantees are required." In Sumy, it was a college the Russians chose to target overnight, with yet more civilians wounded. The Ukrainians said the Russians will soon have the ability to launch 1,000 drone and missile attacks a night, and they don't have the means to fully defend themselves. While they want security guarantees in future, right now they want far more help to counter that rising threat. Ukrainians want an end to this war, but need cast-iron guarantees that Vladimir Putin can never start it up again. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Kyiv.
Well, Dominic is live in Kyiv. We're beginning to be at the sharp end, Dominic, where things might have to be given up. The Ukrainian people, of course, want peace, but, perhaps not if it means big concessions to Russia.
No, I think they'll be relieved that there was no absolute disaster in the Oval Office like there was in February. But I think otherwise they'll be rather underwhelmed so far by what's come out of Washington. The Ukrainians we speak to just can't understand why Donald Trump seems to take Vladimir Putin at his word. They see that as incredibly naive and gullible. And to bear that out, they'll point at what Vladimir Putin has been doing since this summit began. We've had a cruise missile attack on Slovyansk in the Donetsk. We've had shelling in Kharkiv further north, and the Ukrainians say a number of drones, at least 40, have been launched by the Russians, and a number of strategic bombers, Tu-95 bombers. They know when they're launched that there's going to be heavy bombardment later in the night. So that's the real Vladimir Putin, they say. And they say any peacemaking has to begin with the understanding, which they don't believe is understood in Washington, that Vladimir Putin doesn't just want slivers of land and territory in Ukraine. He wants the whole of Ukraine extinguished as a viable, liberal, democratic entity on his border. He believes it should be part of Russia. Now, the only way to deter him from pursuing that ambition, they say, is, first of all, a ceasefire and then really severe sanctions that hit him where it hurts, particularly his oil industry. The kind of sanctions that Donald Trump was threatening right up to this summit and has now backed away from, as well as calling for that immediate ceasefire, calling off that as well. So they see this American president as sort of switching sides in this conflict, and that causes them deep concern. But also, they're very worried about the possibility of them having to, or be asked to give up land in the Donetsk that they fought over for 11 years. That is unacceptable for them and would be suicidal politically and strategically for Zelenskyy. Now, they may see some consolation in this talk of security guarantees, America possibly getting more involved in them, but I think they'll be less impressed than observers in Washington. Yeah, because they have stopped believing a word that Donald Trump says. As one man said to me the other day, he says one thing in the morning, he says another in the evening, and then another thing the next day. He has shifted positions so much in the run-up to the Alaska summit. I think it can be understood and forgiven for not really believing what he says now. So I think if there is progress and it does lead to a trilateral or possibly a quadrilateral meeting, then that will be something they want to see. But they want to hear so much more detail about what the Americans are offering before they can really start believing and be convinced by what appears to be emerging new diplomacy towards some kind of end to this conflict.
Yes, just an update, Dominic. In fact, coming from Kyiv, from our journalistic colleagues there at NBC, and it comes from the Ukrainian president's spokesperson in a message to journalists on WhatsApp. The meeting has ended in Washington, but European leaders and the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy are staying for now in Washington, D.C. to continue talks, potentially in another format. Don't know if that includes Trump or not, but anyway, the substantive meeting with Trump at the Oval Office, from that message, seems to be over. We know that Donald Trump, seemed to leave that meeting to make a call to Vladimir Putin. And in terms of the Russian leader, will events in Washington tonight have changed anything for him? Because presumably he was fairly satisfied with the Alaska summit.
I don't think so. I think he'll be encouraged by the way things are going. I mean, it's always been his great objective is to drive a wedge into the transatlantic alliance, and he appeared to have achieved that in Alaska because he's now has Donald Trump agreeing that an immediate ceasefire doesn't have to happen, something that he has stood full square with his European allies for weeks now, calling for and threatening severe sanctions if it's not acceded to by the Russians. And he's receded away from that threat as well. And I don't think much from what we've heard from Donald Trump today kind of suggests he's going to go back to the Europeans on those points. Now, he might be worried about this talk of security guarantees, but I think he'll be sort of reassured by the rather nebulous and vague and rather ambiguous nature of what the Americans are saying about that. And I think he'll be happy that we are now talking about the Ukrainians giving up land. He asked for more in Alaska. He asked for a chunk of the Donetsk that the Russians haven't taken yet. That's sort of typical negotiating tactics, particularly for an old KGB operative like Vladimir Putin. But the fact that the Ukrainians are now going to talk possibly about giving up land the Russians have taken by force in whatever meetings emerge, whether they're trilateral or quadrilateral, that would be, I think, encouraging for him as well, and really discouraging for Europe, because that would establish this principle that all these European leaders have said cannot be vindicated by this conflict. You can never allow aggression to prevail. We're now in a situation where that is going to be considered and may be a very real possibility in negotiations ahead. That is going to be a victory for Vladimir Putin.
OK, Dominic, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's just show you the scene then at the White House. We have a live shot of the White House press briefing room. No seal there, so potentially not hearing from Trump. We'll wait to see if they stick one on it. We're not quite sure why that's open. There have been no flagged news conferences after this. We've also got a live picture too of the German embassy. It's gone, actually, I lie now. We did have pictures of the German embassy in Washington, presumably anticipating hearing also from the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. We think we'll hear from Starmer a little bit later as well. So all to play for in Washington in terms of the detail of those discussions which have taken place, we think, in the East Room of the White House for a considerable length of time with those 7 European leaders, Macron, Merz, Meloni, Stubb of Finland, Starmer, and obviously the NATO Secretary-General and Ursula von der Leyen as well, who has once again reiterated, actually, that we come as allies and friends, she has said. This is after that White House meeting for peace in Ukraine and in Europe. This is an important moment as we continue to work on strong security guarantees for Ukraine. So we're beginning to get words of that meeting, which appears to have concluded in its present form. And we'll certainly take you to the White House should we hear more. Well, President Trump has previously said that the onus is on President Zelenskyy to agree on concessions of land that he believes could end the war. A prize for President Putin would be the Donbass industrial heartland. Our military analyst, Sean Bell, explains the reasons why this part of Ukraine has become a defining fault line in the war.
If you look at territory, which is one of the key ones, President Trump has already suggested that Crimea is off the table, that it isn't going to be part of that negotiation. It is worth pointing out that Crimea was originally part of the Soviet Union. They'd fought hundreds of years ago for the strategically important port of Sevastopol down in the south there. In 1954, Khrushchev had handed that to Ukraine, largely for administrative purposes, when Ukraine was actually just a county of the Soviet Union at the time. Of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Donbass, Russia and Ukraine very nearly went to war over Crimea, and there was an accommodation made at the time. And of course, but now that's why in 2014, following about 2 decades of Ukraine starting to look further to the West for economic support, and with NATO starting to become on the agenda, that the Russians moved into Crimea. Now, having got in there, it'd be incredibly difficult military operation to liberate that. And that's why many people think that Crimea is not a useful negotiating tool at the moment. Having moved into that, though, Russia built a bridge across the Kursk to actually join this to Russia itself. But, of course, that was incredibly vulnerable. And as the years went by, that's why that Russia had started a sort of insurgency up in the Donetsk region and tried to build this land bridge across the region. Now, why the focus on the Donbass region? Well, a lot of its mineral resources and the like. This is the one area that Russia hasn't yet taken. But this isn't about just trying to get to the borders. It's not like they're trying to secure Somerset. Why is this actually key? If we go zoom in a little bit further, there's a line of cities, line of towns, based on road junctions and rail junctions, strategically important, that are, if they are going to be very difficult for Russia to take. If you remember the battle for Bakhmut back 18 months ago, about 60,000 people died in that battle about 18 months. So it's really difficult for any of these to fall. Russia is, of course, paranoid that if they don't take these, then there is the danger that Ukraine in the future cuts the land bridge and therefore isolates the Crimea. From a Ukrainian perspective, if these were to fall, there's lots and lots of free area up here that Russia could actually rampage across. The real key here, though, is what is going on in President Putin's mind. Is his ambition still to take the whole of Ukraine, or is it simply to secure this land bridge? If it's just the land bridge, then the conversation is about territory and it's about security guarantees, and therefore there's just the faintest prospect of a negotiated settlement. If actually Putin's ambition is still the whole of Ukraine, then I'm afraid all of this is just window dressing. It's Putin playing for time, and frankly, we're no closer to any sort of solution than we were a few weeks ago.
Sean Bell there on that critically important remaining part of Donetsk, about 30% of which Russia has not yet captured and that Putin is seeking. So an extraordinary few hours then at the White House, President Trump reminding us how unprecedented it is to see so many European prime ministers, presidents and leaders inside the Oval Office for those discussions, flanking the leader of Ukraine after his berating in the Oval Office back at the end of February this year. The bodyguards, some have suggested they are, the wingmen with a strong message that America needs to back a fair and just peace for Ukraine, and confirming what we heard from Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy, who said it on television at the weekend, that actually America is considering security guarantees for Ukraine as part of any peace settlement. Europe, he said, would be the first line of defence because they are there, but we will help them. And Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, pointing out that this is a significant breakthrough in what happens next. So President Trump, really the centre of geopolitics right now, flanked by those important European leaders in his quest for peace for Ukraine. He's supposed to have left the meeting, which took place in the East Room of the White House, to call President Putin. We understand that meeting is over. We're not sure if they've now moved to the Oval Office. Little bit of confusion, but we will clarify that as soon as we can. But really, as I said, substantively, the security guarantees for Ukraine is what we've heard today. And also, once again, some of those European leaders, Macron of France, for example, and Merz of Germany, calling for a truce or a ceasefire, something which Trump has said he does not deem to be necessary. And that is after that Alaska meeting with President Putin on Friday. Well, let's get a final thought then from our US correspondent Mark Stone. An unprecedented collection of people, a meeting now of several hours if you take all of them, Mark. So what has come out of it and what happens next?
Well, I think there have been diplomatic achievements today and over the course of the past few days. The fact that Trump made the meeting on Friday happen, to remove the optics and the uncomfortable optics that many saw with that Alaska moment. The fact that it happened is significant. There's no question about that. But I think today, more than that, the fact that Donald Trump and the American administration appears now, without any detail, and that really is lacking, but they do appear to be talking about security commitments. That's a remarkable change of position by the Americans, because they were so clear and have been so clear over quite a long period of time that this was a European problem, not Trump's war. It was something that Europe needs to deal with on their own. And it was kind of the catalyst for the meltdown between Zelenskyy and Trump back in February. And yet now something's changed. Clearly part of it is the fact that what Trump has seen is Europe taking things more seriously, as he would see it, spending more on their own defence. He takes credit for that. Yes, all that is true. But even that taken into account, Ukraine still needed an American backstop, a security backstop, which Trump now appears to be offering. Of course, what we don't know, or in fact we do if we take what the Kremlin has been saying today at face value, is how the Kremlin will react to that, how Putin would react to an American security guarantee. It depends on what it looks like. If that guarantee involves American troops in Ukraine, I find that very hard to believe, or indeed any NATO troops in Ukraine. The Brits and others have offered to put peacekeepers in Ukraine. Well, then for Putin, that is a non-starter. The other issue we've got no clarity on is this idea, it's being described as land transfers, territorial transfers, which is an inaccurate way of describing it, I think. This idea that there'd be some sort of a land swap. There's no land swap up for grabs. The Russians are not offering to give any Russian land to Ukraine. What they are wanting is to take more Ukrainian land as part of a peace deal, not the front line as it stands now, but the whole of those two oblasts, effectively counties in the east of Ukraine, districts in the east of Ukraine that make up the Donbass. Now, we haven't got any public commitment, at least, from Zelenskyy that he is prepared to give any land. Those are the two key issues. So on the face of it, this day could have gone really badly. It could have been a repeat of February. It absolutely wasn't that. The optics have been positive. The mood has been positive. The vibe has been positive. But in a sense, that puts us back where we were before February. It does not put us in a position where peace is genuinely any closer. But, you know, Trump has been on the phone to Putin in the White House this evening. We understand the main meeting is over, but the European leaders are still gathered in the Oval Office. Some of them may indeed stay overnight. They were due to go home tonight. Perhaps they won't. Perhaps they'll stay longer. There is momentum. Momentum is absolutely key. But is it? Are we closer to peace? It's extremely hard to know.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for all your reporting. It's been a long day, and it's continuing, no doubt. That's, you know, it's been really extraordinary to watch it all. Thank you so much. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers. That is in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the political journalist Zoe Grunwald and the Sun's political editor Jack Elsom. Well, among these stories we will be discussing, this on the front page of The Guardian, as Donald Trump said today that there is no need for a ceasefire in Ukraine to secure a peace deal. We'll be right back with that and plenty more.